The ability to create secure VPN tunnels and allow clients to securely tunnel into your network is really useful thing to be able to know how to do. So in this lab, I'm going to create a CentOS 7 server that will also be an OpenVPN server that will allow clients to securely tunnel into the network. To do this, I'm going to do this right on top of my laptop using VMware Player. So in the diagram, this is my laptop, and the box represents all of my virtual machines that I can serve from my laptop. So you can see here I have a virtual machine client here, a virtual machine client computer here, and then here is my virtual machine, and I'm going to install CentOS 7 on a virtual machine using VMware Player. Now I'm going to install 2 network interface cards or 2 Ethernet ports on this virtual machine. One will be in bridged mode, and it will pick up an IP address on the network just like my host laptop computer does. Like any other computer on the network, it can pick up an IP address in bridged mode. So that will be ETH0, and then I'll use DHCP to pick up an IP address here. So this will face the internet. Then on my second Ethernet port or network interface card, I'm going to put that in LAN segment mode in VMware Player. Now in LAN segment mode, what will happen is the CentOS 7 server on this network interface will only be able to communicate with other virtual machines that are on that same LAN segment on their NICs. So if I was to basically run another virtual machine and I put that network card in the same LAN segment, then they could talk to each other here. Now by doing this, I turn my CentOS 7 server virtual machine into a router, and it will be able to bridge from the public network over here represented by the yellow, where all my computers on, let's say on my local area network, to this special LAN segment network that I'm going to call VLAN 10, and I'll run, let's say, a 192.168.10 network on it. And then if this interior client, if this virtual machine that I'm going to also create wants to, let's say, reach the internet, it'll have to go through my CentOS 7 server to get to the internet. Now on the other side, this client right here, my virtual machine here, whether it's running Windows or Linux or whatever, it will be able to VPN in through my CentOS 7 server and get into the green network over here. Also, my laptop running Windows will also be able to VPN into the green network through the CentOS 7 server. So that's going to be the test. Can we create a VPN server using OpenVPN that clients on the network will be able to VPN through to get to the inner network? So now what I need to do is I need to create my CentOS 7 virtual machine in VMware Player. So I'm going to open up VMware Player. I have it open right here, and I'm going to create a new virtual machine, and I'm going to install the operating system later after I create the virtual machine hardware. So I'll press next, and it's going to be Linux, and I've already got the chosen operating system here, CentOS 64-bit, that's the version, and I'll hit next. I'll name it, so it'll be CentOS 7 Server 3. I can change the location of where I want to save this virtual machine, so I'm going to switch it to my E drive. I have virtual machines here. Make a new folder for it. CentOS 7 Server 3. All right, I have it selected. Click OK. Double check to make sure it's the right path to where I want to save it. Press next. Set my hard drive size. I'm going to choose 14 gigabytes for my hard drive size. I'll accept the default. Press next. I'm going to customize my hardware. The first thing I need to do is go to my CD DVD drive, and I need to use an ISO image file, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an ISO image file. I've already downloaded CentOS 7 server ISO image, the installer file that I can install CentOS 7 with, and I haven't burned it to a DVD. What I've done is just saved the ISO image file to my hard drive. So I'm going to select this option and then browse to that image. Now the image is also in a folder here. ISO images, CentOS 7, 64-bit. So now I have the path to my ISO file. Once again, you'll need to download this ISO file from CentOS.org. So I have that selected, connect it, power on, that's good. So now what I'll do is I'll switch to my network adapter. Now I need two network adapters. The first one I'm going to put in bridged mode, and I need to make sure that I configure the network adapter to use my right NIC. Since this is a laptop, it has a Ethernet port, a gigabit Ethernet port right here, and then it has a wireless Ethernet port right here. I'm going to make sure this time I'm choosing the wireless NIC so that the one that my laptop's using basically to get to the internet. So this will be in bridge mode, and I've got the right NIC on my physical computer that it's targeting or mapping to. And then I'll add another NIC. So I'll click add down here, choose network adapter, press next. I'll start it off in bridged mode, and then later I'm going to change it to LAN segment mode. I'll press finish. So now I have two network adapters. Right now they're both in bridged mode. We'll see if that works and if the CentOS 7 operating system or virtual machine picks up both network adapters. All right. In LAN segments, I will be using them eventually. I think I can set this up right now, actually. Take a look. I'll choose this second network adapter and now change it to LAN segment. And then under LAN segments, you're going to need to create a LAN segment. You can see that I've already added one, right? Here's how you add one, VLAN, let's say 40, right? I have one here that says VLAN 10. That's the one I'm going to use. Now it's just a name here. Just click OK, and that's the name that I'm going to choose. All right, VLAN 10, LAN segment. That'll be this network adapter here. Once again, you might have to create your LAN segment using this tool here. All right, that looks good. I've got the plan for my two network adapters. I'll click Close, and also customize the hardware. I'm going to customize the hardware, and the memory is set right now to 1 GB. That's fine. For this project, I'll change that to 2. So I'll change it to 2048 megabytes. So 2 GB. And I'll go to processors, and maybe I'll use 2 processors on this virtual machine. Okay, so that looks good. Now you're going to adjust your processors and your memory depending on how much memory you have available on your desktop or laptop that you're creating your virtual machines on. So if you have 8 GB of memory on your laptop, then I can afford 2 for this virtual machine, and that's fine. If you have a quad-core processor like I do, then I can use 2 processors, let's say, for the virtual machine, and that would be fine. And I can always change that later if I want. I'll hit close and finish, and now the virtual machine has been created, and all we need to do is power it on, and it should boot to the ISO image file, because if I click edit virtual machine settings again, we've told it on the CD/DV drive to not use the physical drive, the physical DVD drive, but use the ISO image file and boot from this. So that should work nicely. So I'll click OK and press play, and it should boot to CentOS 7, and then we'll be able to run through the installation. All right, there it is. I'll capture the mouse, and you see that I'm using the keyboard to switch whether I want to install CentOS 7, test the media, or troubleshoot. I'm just going to press install and hit enter, switch up to install, press enter, and allow this to install. Now, as soon as you click inside the VMware Player window, it'll capture your mouse. To release the mouse so you can get your mouse back, just press Control-Alt keys to the right of your spacebar on your keyboard. So hold down Control and Alt to the right of the space bar on your keyboard, and that should release your cursor. I'll finish the installation in the next video. Okay, I'll run through the CentOS 7 installer. So I'll accept the default here for English, press continue. I'll set my localization settings, my date and time, press done. Keyboard and language support's already done, so I'll scroll down. My installation destination, I'll click here, and I'll need to select my hard disk. So I'll click it twice till I see the check mark, and I'm just going to choose the automatic default partitioning that is recommended. So automatically configure partitioning, that's fine. I'll click done. For my software selection, right now it's set to a minimal install, which will be basically a command line interface only. If you're new to CentOS 7, I recommend giving yourself a desktop. So I'll click software selection, and I'll scroll down and choose the GNOME desktop, and I'll accept the default packages and just press done. Network and host name. So I'll select this, and you can see here that I've got an Ethernet port here. I do not see two Ethernet ports here. I gave it two when I created the virtual machine, but I'm only seeing one, so that's interesting. I'll turn this on, and I'll press done. So all of these settings have now been set. All I have to do is press begin installation, and it should begin the installation. Now, while the installation is starting, I can set my root password and create a user. So for the user, this is what I recommend for the students when we do this in the lab. I just use the full name student, username student, password student, and confirm the password student. Now, obviously, creating a user that's named student and the password student is not secure, but you can always change this later, and this is just a test case scenario right now, so we could always change the user later. I'll press done, and it gives me a message here. I've provided a weak password, right? And then it says press done anyway. So it says, hey, that's a weak password, but I know it is, so I'll press done anyway. And then for the root password, I'll click here, and I'm also going to use student as the root password. I know it's a weak password, but I can always change it later. And once again, this works for me when I'm teaching classes and I've got 20 students in a lab environment. It's just better if we all have the same thing, and then it makes troubleshooting easier later. All right, I'll press done and done again, and the install is running. It's going to take at least 15 minutes, I imagine, maybe more, and I'll skip forward through the install process and continue the video when it's close to finish. Okay, the installation is complete, so all I'll do is press reboot. Okay, CentOS 7 has rebooted, and it looks like I need to accept the licensing information. So I'll click on this and scroll down and check mark I accept the license agreement. Press done. Now I'll scroll down and select finish configuration down here in the bottom right hand corner. Finish configuration. Kdump, I'll just accept the default here and press forward. And my install is up. So I'll click on student, put in the password student, and sign in. All right, and CentOS 7 has installed. The first thing I'm going to do is take a look at my network connections. Up here, this is the network manager, and you can see that. Actually, I'll just press next here, and next, and next, and start using CentOS 7. Okay, now I'll go up to the Network Manager, and if I right click here, it looks like it only sees the one network interface. Let's take a look. I'll go to Applications, Terminal, open up a terminal connection, and type in ifconfig. And you can see that the CentOS 7 virtual machine only sees the one Ethernet NIC, and it's called ENO16777736. So it only sees the one network interface. So I'm going to need to re-add that so we have the two network interfaces. So what I'll do is I'll shut down my CentOS 7 machine, power it off, and I'm going to need to have to re-add that network interface card. CentOS 7 virtual machine has been powered off. I'll reopen VMware Player. Here is my virtual machine. I'll edit the virtual machine settings. I'll remove the second network adapter. So I'll just click Remove. And I'll click OK, and then I'll edit it again. And I'll add it this time. So I'm going to add that second network adapter. Network adapter, next, bridged, finish. There it is. And once again, I'll change it to LAN segment mode, change it to VLAN 10 here that I already created for my LAN segment, and click OK. And I'll play my virtual machine. And if this works as I think it will, this time CentOS 7 will see the second NIC and I'll be able to use it. Okay, I'll log in the second time here and see if it registers. If I hit Control-Alt on my keyboard, release the cursor, you can see that the two network interfaces in VMware Player are registering up here, and they're both green, so they're both here. The question is whether the VMware Player sees them. So now if I select up here, we'll take a look, there it is. Ethernet EN01677736 and Ethernet EN03355490. So now it sees the two network interfaces. And if I once again run a terminal and type ifconfig, we can see that both network interfaces are there. I have the EN016 and the EN033, and then this is the LO, this is my loopback interface. So it looks good. And also the EN01677 interface has an IP address that it's picked up from my local network through my wireless NIC of my host laptop computer. And you can see that I've picked up an IP address and I'm on the network. So, and we'll just test to see if I can ping Yahoo. You'll need internet connectivity to do this lab. All right, I can ping Yahoo, so I'll hit Control-C on my keyboard, and I'm ready to go. Now that CentOS 7 has been installed, we can start configuring our server. I'll click and log in. Now that I'm logged in, I'll go to Applications and open up a terminal. In the terminal window, I've changed the font size by going to Edit, Preferences, Profiles, editing the profile, and changing the font size to size 16. This will make it easier to see during the video tutorial. I'll close that. The first thing I'm going to need to do is su for root access. So I'll type in su, press enter, and then put in my root user password. Now I have root access. Next, I'll type in the word hostname, and this is a variable name that will tell me the host name of my server. This is also my server name. You can see that the server name right now, or the host name, is localhost.localdomain. This is the default. If we're going to set up a server and make it an OpenVPN server, and maybe we'll put up some other services that we'll do with this server, we're going to want to have a host name for our server. So what we need to do is edit the hostname file. So what I'll do is I'll type nano, which is text editor, and we'll go into the etc directory, root etc, and the host name file, and we'll change the name localhost.localdomain to the name of our server. So I'll call it Dan's CentOS -S3 for server 3. That looks pretty good to me. I'll hit Control X, Y to accept the changes, and then press enter. Okay, so now I've edited the hostname file. I'm also going to do an up arrow and edit the hosts file. So I'll change that. Now it's nano root etc/hosts. I'll press enter. And you can see here, this is my host file. My host file maps IP addresses to names. And you can see that right now the loopback address 127.0.0.1 is set to localhost, localhost.localdomain, localhost 4, all these names. So I'll just move the cursor over using the keyboard, and I'll put in here Dan's CentOS -S3. I believe that was the name I gave it. And then I'll even do that, this ::1 is for IPv6. I can do that here as well if I want to. Okay, that looks pretty good. And I'll just push this over one. All right, that looks good. Control X to exit, Y to save, and enter. So now that looks good. If I want to double check my edits, I can always go back in, take a look. Okay, that looks good. And I'll do the same thing here. That looks good. For these changes to take effect, I'm going to reboot my system, and when it comes back online, I'll run the hostname command again to see if the name has changed. So I'll reboot. And once the system's rebooted, I will start the video again. Okay, the system rebooted and I logged back in. So now I'll su for root access again. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in an ifconfig command to take a look at those interfaces. Now the network interfaces, my Ethernet ports, are ENO167, and then this one's ENO335. And these names are pretty weird. I would prefer it if these names for my network interfaces were something like ETH0 and ETH1, and I'm not quite sure why in this VMware player and CentOS 7 why it's not seeing these interfaces with the correct type of numbering association. But I did some searching online and I found out a way where we could change these and get them back to ETH0 and ETH1. So let's do that. So what I'll do is just type clear here. To do that, what we can do is we can do a nano and edit the etc default grub file. So grub is our bootloader. We'll hit enter. We can edit this line right here, grub command line Linux. And what we'll do is I'm going to go all the way to the end. So I'm using the arrow on my keyboard and just keep going all the way to the end. And I'm going to append some text to the end. Now I want to do it right before this quotation mark. So I'm going right here, and this is what I'm going to put in. I'm going to type in net.ifnames, so net.ifnames equals 0, space, BIOS dev name equals 0. So there it is, net.if names equals 0, space, BIOS dev name equals 0. I have an extra space in here, I don't want that. So there we are. That looks pretty good. So now what I'll do is I'll just do a Control X to exit, Y to accept the changes, and hit enter. So now that we've edited the etc default grub file, we need to create a new grub configuration file. Now to do that, we can use this program that's built into Linux, and that is grub2-mkconfig, grub2 make config, and I typed it wrong here. So it's grub2-mkconfig space -o, and we have to provide the path to the bootloader configuration file, which is in boot grub2/grub.cfg. That looks pretty good, so I'll hit enter. All right, it looks like it's generating a grub configuration file. It looks like it worked. And now what I need to do is reboot. And while I'm rebooting the system, I will pause the video and then I'll log back in and start the video again. All right, I logged back in. Let's see if it worked. Terminal. I'll type in ifconfig. And you can see now I have eth1 and eth0. And eth0 is picking up the IP address from the network. And eth1 is going to be our LAN segment, and we're going to configure that. So now that we have the network interfaces reading the way that we want them, now it's time to configure them. And so that's the next thing that we're going to do. Now to do that, I'll just type clear. Now to do that, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to change directories here. We're going to go into root etc sysconfig network-scripts. So we'll go in here and I'll type an ls command, and you can see that the files are in here. The green files are scripts and these black files are configuration files. They're text files. And you can see that there is a configuration file for ifcfg-eno167736. Now, this is our configuration file to manually configure that network interface. Now, this is the network interface that we changed to eth0. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the name of this file. So I'll highlight this, I'll right-click, copy that. And what I'll do is I'll say move, and then I'll paste the name of the file. There it is, and then a space, and then the name that I want it to be, which is ifcfg-eth0. And that should rename the file. Now you can see here that I'm getting a permission denied, and that's because I forgot to sue for root access. I'm still in student access now, student user access. So we have to do that. So I'll quickly sue and put in the password. And now I'll try that command again. mv space, I'll paste it in. And the new name, ifcfg-eth0. That should have renamed the file. I'll do an ls command to verify, and sure enough, there it is. So now I have a configuration file for my eth0 interface, but I don't see one here for eth1. I have ifconfig or ifcfg-lo for my loopback interface, which the loopback interface goes nowhere. That's not essentially something I'm going to configure. I'm going to be configuring, I need eth1. So what I'll do is, I'll clear this again. And what I'll do is I'll copy eth0, the eth0 file, and I'll copy it to another file named ifcfg-eth1. So now I should have two files, and I'm going to need to edit both files and put in the settings that I want for each network interface. Do an ls command, sure enough, there they are, eth0 and eth1. So now it's time to edit those files. I'm going to edit the eth1 file first. So So here is the eth1 file that I just opened up in Nano, and I'm going to need to edit this. Now the hardware address is your MAC address, and if I want to leave this address in there, then I need to make sure that it matches the MAC address for eth1. Now if I go up here to my VMware player and I go to settings, I can actually go into this second network adapter here on the LAN segment and click advanced, and you can see here is the MAC address for that network adapter. So if I want to keep this hardware address, I'm going to need this. So I'll do a Control C, cancel, cancel, and right here I can paste it. Isn't that amazing? You can paste right from there, and so if you want to keep that hardware address in there, it should match the actual network interface. Or you can just get rid of that line altogether. I'm going to leave it, and I'll just make sure that the hardware address matches right now. I'm also going to add some extra lines here. So right here, I'll hit enter, and I'm going to put in device equals, and in between quotation marks, eth1. The boot protocol here, I'm going to change that to static or none, and I'm going to add a line after here, IP ADDR equals 192.168.10.1, and then net mask equals 255.255.255.0. And then I'm going to get rid of the next three lines. Peer routes, I'll get rid of. Peer DNS, I'll get rid of. And default route, I'll get rid of. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, in class, we got rid of this UUID. So I'm going to do the same thing here since I got rid of it in class. And then the name, ENO167336, we're going to change that to eth1. And then on boot, we want this interface to come up. Sure, on boot, yes. So this looks pretty good. This looks solid. So I'll do a Control X and a Y and an enter, and that has now been configured. So now I'll edit eth0. Now for eth0, it's the same situation. I want to make sure that the hardware address matches the actual hardware address of the NIC. So I'll go up here and I'll go to settings, and this is the first network interface, and I'll make sure I have that selected. Go to advanced, and you can see here 8DB4. And if we look over there, we'll see if it matches 8DB4. Cancel, cancel. 8DB4, look, it matches. That's great. All right, so then type equals Ethernet. I'll put in device equals, and then in between quotation marks, eth0. Boot proto DHCP, I can leave that. I'll leave all of this, and I'll change the name to eth0, and I'll get rid of this UUID. Control X, Y, and enter. So now both of those have been configured. So now that I've configured both of my interfaces, I want to get rid of the network manager. Now the network manager is this auto tool that automatically manages my network interfaces, but since we've manually configured our network interfaces, we might as well just rely on our own configurations and not use this network manager. So to get rid of the network manager, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in systemctl stop network manager, all one word, and notice a capital N and a capital M, and that should stop the network manager. And then I'm going to do an up arrow, and then I'll change it to disable. So systemctl disable network manager, that looks good too, and that should disable it. And then I'm going to do a service network restart to restart the network. Now notice it's actually restarting the network it says via systemctl, so I could have used systemctl to restart my network too. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to reboot the system, and when the system comes back up, I shouldn't see this network manager tool here in the upper corner, but I should have control, complete manual control over my network interfaces. So let's see if that works. I'll reboot and then continue the video after the reboot. So the system finished rebooting, and I logged in and opened up a terminal window, and let's see what's going on with our network interfaces. I'll type ifconfig, and you can see there's eth1 with the 192.168.10.1 address. Looks like that's up, and if I scroll up, you can see there's eth0, and it's picked up an IP address from the DHCP server, and so I'm also online. So everything looks pretty good. I will do one other thing, and that is ping Yahoo to make sure I have connectivity. I do, so that looks good. And if we look up at the top, you do not see the Network Manager GUI tool here, so we have complete control now over the network interfaces. If I want to take the interface up or down, I su for root access, and now I can do an if config eth1, let's say down, to take down the interface. I can also do an if config eth0 down, and that should take down the interface. We'll take a look. If config, and you can see that all I see now is my loopback interface, and then I'll bring those interfaces back up. If config eth0 up, and if config eth1 up, and then if config, and you can see the interfaces are back up. So that's nice. So now it's time to install OpenVPN, and I'll begin doing that in the next video tutorial.